The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. From the story by Washington Irving. Adapted by Freya Littledale. Illustrated by Melanie W. Hall. Not far from the village of Tarrytown lies a quiet little valley that has always been one of the most enchanted places on earth. It is known as Sleepy Hollow. The very land itself seems to cast a spell over the people, who move and speak as if they were in a dream. They hear strange music and voices in the air, and they whisper of ghosts and goblins that haunt the valley. The most fearsome ghost of all is the horseman without a head. Some say his head was carried away by a cannonball during the Revolutionary War, and the ghost won't rest until he finds it. So every night he rides to the battleground in search of his missing head. At dawn, he returns to the graveyard where he was buried. People still huddle around a crackling fire and tell tales of this phantom called the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. Long ago, a schoolmaster named Ichabod Crane came from Connecticut to teach the children of Sleepy Hollow. Tall and skinny, with narrow shoulders and a small flat head, he looked as if he were pinned together. His arms were like noodles dangling from his sleeves, while his feet were as huge as shovels. Striding along on a windy day, with his clothes fluttering in the breeze, he could have been mistaken for a scarecrow just escaped from a cornfield. His one-room schoolhouse, built of logs, was in a lonely spot at the foot of a hill. Close by, a brook murmured while his students mumbled their ABCs. Sometimes Ichabod commanded,
"Pay attention!"
And if a lazy pupil failed to do as he was told, Ichabod spanked the offender with a birch switch.
"Spare the rod and spoil the child,"
he always said. Ichabod's pupils were never spoiled. But Ichabod Crane was not an unkind man. Indeed, after school, he often went home with some of his students, especially if their mothers were skilled in the art of cooking. You see, his wages were small, and though he was very skinny, he had the appetite of a bear. So Ichabod spent many afternoons stuffing himself with cakes and puddings and pies, which the good mothers happily made for him. Aside from eating, one of Ichabod's greatest pleasures was reading tales of ghosts and witches. On sunny days, he often stretched out on a bed of clover near the brook and read until dusk. The tales were as real and necessary to him as food. On each page, he found delicious, scary morsels. But when he made his way through the woods back to the farmhouse where he was staying, every sound startled him. Even the trees seemed to reach out their branches to grab him.
"Sleepy Hollow is bewitched,"
Ichabod told himself.
"Still, I will not be afraid. My voice will drive away all evil spirits that dwell here, even the Headless Horseman."
Then Ichabod began to sing, so loudly the people of the valley could hear him as they sat by their doors in the evening. And they were quick to say,
"Aye, the schoolmaster has a wonderful voice."
Almost everyone admired the schoolmaster.
He reads books from beginning to end,
said one farmer's wife.
He knows many tales of witchcraft,
Said another.
He sings like a nightingale,
Sighed a third.
and I have some news.
Announced the best cook in the group.
In exchange for my plum pudding, he's going to give me singing lessons.
Singing lessons?
Cried the others.
We want them too.
Ichabod didn't know it, but his troubles were about to begin. Until then, his life had been fairly pleasant. For a week at a time, he lived at the homes of his pupils. There, he mended fences and cut wood for the fire. He even helped take care of the children. He could sit with a child on his lap, rock a cradle with one huge foot, and sing song after song without stopping. When Ichabod agreed to give singing lessons, the women were delighted. They gathered around him, and Ichabod led them in song. After the lessons, they told ghostly tales, while a row of apples roasted and sputtered on the hearth. They felt cosy and safe together. But Ichabod didn't feel cosy or safe during his lonely walks home. A snow-covered bush could be a ghost. Any sound could be footsteps. The footsteps could belong to a stranger, and the stranger could be the Headless Horseman. Yet, the Headless Horseman and all other ghosts were terrors of the night that disappeared in daylight. And, in spite of such horrors, Ichabod might have remained a contented man. But then, Katrina Van Tassel joined the singing group. From the moment Ichabod met her, he lost his peace of mind. He was bewitched night and day. Like most people in the valley, Katrina's family was related to the first Dutch settlers. She was the daughter and only child of old Bultus Van Tassel, the richest farmer in the region. Katrina was famous for her beauty and her family's wealth. What's more, she was a coquette who flirted with every lad she met, and there wasn't one who didn't want her for his bride. But until she met Ichabod Crane, Katrina's favourite suitor was Brom van Brunt. This local hero was celebrated throughout the region for his great skill on horseback. He was broad-shouldered and double-jointed, with curly black hair and a twinkle in his eyes. Known for his mischief as well as his strength, he was nicknamed Brom Bones. Brom was always ready for a good fight or a good laugh. Sometimes he and his gang, the Sleepy Hollow Boys, rode past the farmhouses in the dead of night.
Whoopee!
They shouted. Good people, awakened from their sleep, just smiled and shook their heads.
Brom Bones and his friends are having fun tonight,
They said. No matter what Brom did, they couldn't help admiring him. With a rival like Brom, most men would have given up hope of winning a lady's love. But Ichabod was unlike most men.
I will give Katrina private singing lessons,
He decided.
and I will pick a bouquet of daisies and snapdragons just for her.
With bouquet in hand, the schoolmaster found his way to the Van Tassel mansion. It was nestled in a cove on the shores of the Hudson River. Nearby, Ichabod saw the barn that seemed to burst with pigs, geese, turkeys, and chickens. When he entered the house, his eyes were dazzled by pewter mugs, silver candlesticks and mahogany tables that shone like mirrors. He pictured himself lord and master of this grand estate. He had only to win Katrina, who was the lady of his dreams. So he visited her every week, and every week, after the singing lessons, Ichabod wooed Katrina on their little twilight walks.
My dear,
He'd say,
you are prettier than all the flowers in the valley.
You don't mean it.
Katrina said.
Oh, but I do.
Ichabod assured her. Of course, Brom Bones knew of these visits, and he was eager to fight his rival.
I will double the schoolmaster up and stuff him on a shelf in his own schoolhouse,
he announced. But Ichabod realized he could never win a fight with Brom Bones, and he was very careful to stay out of his way. So Brom was forced to play practical jokes on the schoolmaster. He smoked out the singing class by stopping up the chimney. He and his gang broke into the schoolhouse at night and turned everything topsy-turvy. Ichabod blamed it on witches. But the most vexing prank of all was when Brom trained his dog to whine while Ichabod gave Katrina voice lessons.
It's the witches again,
said Ichabod. Katrina just giggled. Now, one day in late autumn, a messenger came to the schoolhouse.
Sir,
Said he,
you are invited to a harvest festival at the home of the Van Tassels this very evening.
With these words, the messenger bowed and left. Ichabod hurried the students through their lessons and dismissed them an hour early. Then he announced to the empty room,
Tonight I will ask Katrina to be my wife.
Ichabod spent an extra hour dressing in his best, and indeed only, black suit. After combing his straggly hair, he put on a little woolen hat. Then he smiled at himself in a bit of broken mirror.
Remember, Ichabod Crane,
He said.
this is your night.
Ichabod borrowed a plough horse from Hans van Ripper, with whom he was staying. The horse, called Gunpowder, was blind in one eye, shaggy and broken down. But Ichabod didn't seem to mind. He felt like a knight on his way to his lady's castle. Indeed, he was the perfect rider for such a steed. His knees and elbows stuck out like a grasshopper's, while his arms resembled flapping wings. It was a glorious afternoon, and Ichabod feasted his eyes on the trees in their bright fall costumes of gold, orange, purple, and scarlet. He practiced proposing to Katrina.
Will you marry me, my dearest? Will you be my wife?
Robins and blue jays twittered in the bushes, and they all seemed to call, I will, I will. As Ichabod jogged along, his stomach rumbled with hunger. He pictured apple pies and pumpkin pies, honey cakes and fruit cakes, glazed hams and candied yams. He imagined pigs fully roasted with apples in their mouths, while turkeys stuffed with chestnuts lay on pillows of cranberry sauce. Such thoughts were enough to make him smack his lips. Once Ichabod arrived at the festival, he wasn't disappointed. His eyes rolled when he saw the food, and his spirits rose with each mouthful. When the music began, he turned to Katrina.
My dear,
He said.
may I have the honor of this dance?
Katrina blushed and said,
Yes.
So the old fiddler played while everyone danced. But all eyes were on Ichabod, who was as proud of his dancing as he was of his singing. The schoolmaster was the very picture of rhythm, with his arms and legs, and even his eyebrows, moving in time to the music. He smiled at Katrina, and she smiled at him, while Brom Bones sat alone in the corner. When the dancing ended, Ichabod went out on the porch and listened to ghostly tales, told in hushed voices as if they were secrets.
I never used to believe in ghosts,
said an old farmer named Brower.
but now I do because I've seen one. Yes, just last week I saw the headless horseman himself. In fact, I rode behind him until he reached the haunted bridge. You won't believe what happened next.
What?
Asked Bultus Van Tassel.
At the bridge,
Brower whispered.
the horseman turned into a skeleton and vanished over the treetops. Then, even though it was a starlit night, I heard a clap of thunder and saw a flash of lightning.
Everyone was quiet, until Brom Bones spoke.
My horse Daredevil can beat that goblin horse any time.
No one doubted his words. Everyone knew Brom was the finest horseman in the land.
I met the headless horseman a few weeks ago,
Brom continued.
I even spoke to him. I'll race you for a bowl of punch, I said. So off we galloped until we reached the bridge. I was ahead all the way, so he still owes me that bowl of punch. Anyway, the moment we got to the bridge, the horseman vanished in a flash of fire.
Aye,
Brower nodded.
he always vanishes at the haunted bridge.
Ichabod didn't miss a word of these stories. But he couldn't be outdone by the likes of Brom Bones. So he told scary tales of witchcraft that he had heard in his native Connecticut. Then he spoke of phantoms he'd seen in Sleepy Hollow. There were phantoms that howled in the night, and phantoms that stood still and silent as statues near a giant tulip tree. Soon the party began to break up. Families gathered in their wagons and headed home. But Ichabod stayed behind so he could speak privately to Katrina. Again he assured himself,
Tonight she will accept my proposal.
but something must have gone wrong, because Ichabod didn't stay long. No one knows what really happened or why. Perhaps Katrina had encouraged the schoolmaster just to make Brom Bones jealous. She was such a coquette, anything was possible. It was the very witching hour of the night, when the heartbroken Ichabod began his journey home. There wasn't a sign of life for miles around. The cheerful and familiar path suddenly became strange to him. Now and then he heard the howl of a dog or the groan of a bullfrog. Ichabod's mind reeled with tales of ghosts, especially the headless horseman. The night grew darker and darker, as all the stars seemed to sink deeper into the sky. Slow-moving clouds soon hid them all from sight. Poor Ichabod had never felt so alone. The twisted limbs of the old tulip tree groaned and swayed in the wind. Ichabod whistled to fight his fear. He was certain the tree whistled back. At that very moment, Ichabod noticed in the distance a gigantic, shadowy, thing. The thing did not move. It seemed to be a monstrous shadow that was part of the gloom. Ichabod's hair rose up on his head with terror.
What can I do?
He whispered.
It's too late for me to escape.
Then he took a deep breath and called,
Who are you?
His only reply was the dreary hooting of an owl. Ichabod shivered as he called again.
Who are you?
Still no answer. Just then, the monstrous shadow moved to the middle of the road. Though the night was dark and dismal, Ichabod could see the monster's shape. He appeared to be a giant rider mounted on a powerful black horse. As they rode to higher ground, Ichabod saw the horseman outlined against the sky. He was enormous and wrapped in a cloak. But Ichabod was struck with horror when he saw that the horseman had no head. Yet more dreadful still, if that were possible, was the sight of the head itself. Instead of resting on the shoulders, the head was carried before the horseman on the pommel of the saddle. Ichabod's teeth chattered, and his fear turned to desperation. He gave Gunpowder a kick in the ribs. The horse snorted, but he would not run. Indeed, he seemed to move more slowly. The figure was coming nearer. Ichabod could feel the hot breath of the phantom steed close behind him. Dizzy with fear, the schoolmaster rained a shower of kicks and blows on Gunpowder, who suddenly broke into a gallop. The phantom horse did the same. Away they dashed, over bushes and through brambles, with stones flying at every turn. The ride was so violent, the schoolmaster felt as if he were being torn apart. To make matters worse, the saddle slipped out from under him and fell to the ground. Ichabod grasped Gunpowder tightly around the neck and forced himself to stay on the horse. First he slid to one side, then to the other. Still he didn't lose hope. Through an opening in the trees he saw the haunted bridge, famous in all the stories. If I can reach that bridge, he thought, the ghost will vanish in a flash of fire. Ichabod heard the panting of the monstrous phantom horse and the crunching of dry leaves beneath his gigantic hooves. Faster! Ichabod whispered to Gunpowder. After receiving another kick in the ribs, the old horse sprang upon the bridge. Thundering over the planks, he finally reached the opposite side. Then Ichabod looked back to make sure the phantom had vanished in a flash of fire. But the phantom had not vanished. Instead, he rose in his stirrups and hurled his head at the schoolmaster. Ichabod tried to dodge the horrible head, but he was too late. The hideous thing struck his skull with a tremendous crash, and Ichabod tumbled headlong into the dust. Gunpowder, the phantom rider, and the black steed passed him by like a whirlwind. The following morning, Gunpowder was found without his saddle at his master's gate. Ichabod was not seen at breakfast. Dinner hour came, still no Ichabod. Students gathered at the school and wandered near the brook, but they couldn't find their schoolmaster. Finally, after a long and thorough search, the saddle was found trampled in the dirt. Near the bridge, they discovered Ichabod's woolen hat. Close beside the hat lay a shattered pumpkin. The brook was searched, but the schoolmaster's body was not found. Indeed, the mysterious disappearance of Ichabod Crane was never explained. After considering many possibilities, it was generally agreed that he was carried off by the headless horseman. However, several years later, an old farmer visited New York City and brought back some interesting news. He'd heard that Ichabod was still alive. Not only that, but he'd studied law, become a politician, and grown a bit stout. It seemed that the schoolmaster had left Sleepy Hollow not only because he'd lost Katrina, but because of his fear of the headless horseman. As for Brom Bones, soon after his rival disappeared, he led Katrina proudly to the altar. And whenever he heard the story of Ichabod, he always laughed heartily at the mention of the pumpkin. This made some people think that Brom knew more than he chose to tell about the disappearance of Ichabod Crane. Nevertheless, the old country wives, who know best about such matters, insist that Ichabod was carried off by the headless horseman. To this very day, they say the schoolmaster's voice can be heard singing a melancholy tune in the enchanted woodlands of Sleepy Hollow.